Morty cloning scientist?
The best Morty cloning scientist.
You already know Rogue Ricks used Morties to hide themselves from the Citadel. I'm sure you don't know how far they've gone to help supply meet demand.
My plans were always bigger than one jump.
We decide where home is, for each of us. No Morty towns, or Citadels, or huddling together. It's time to grow up.
Get your mouth rounded.
That place had good curly fries.
Oh, you been there?
Rick and Morty just wrapped up the Citadel storyline with an emotional, action-packed epilogue that oddly has a lot in common with a certain vampire western flick that just came out. Complete coincidence, but if you know, you know. Our final trip to the Citadel sheds light on an unexplored aspect of the society that was present since day one. The clones, and how they're struggling to pick up the pieces of their broken empire now that they're left to fend for themselves. I got a feeling this will end up being one of my favorite installments of Season 8, as it gives us a lot to chew on. So let's waste no time and dive right in. With this episode bringing the whole Citadel saga to a close, it's framed in a way identical to Season 3's iconic The Ricklantis mix-up. Both open and end on our Rick and Morty, but most of the runtime is dedicated to following other variants who push the world of the Citadel forward in a major way. In this case, ending that world once and for all. We learn that our Rick has been revisiting the remains of the Citadel to collect wreckage. But why? While I'm sure Rick is a big fan of recycling, making enough trips to the Citadel to where you're in the loop of its societal developments has me thinking that he's crouching up a lot of resources for a top secret project. Rick has been pretty aimless after getting his revenge on Rick Prime, and it makes sense that he would inevitably find something new to fixate on in order to fill the void. My gut tells me he's either working on something that can reverse the Omega device, or something that's ultimately meant to ensure his family's protection. It feels like there's still a lot we don't know about Diane Sanchez. What we saw in the Fear Hole was Morty's perception of her, so we don't even know if that was an honest depiction of what she was like as a person. And just because Rick Prime is out of the picture doesn't mean that Rick is at peace with losing his wife at such a young age. It tracks that he'd want to find a way to bring her back, even if it wouldn't necessarily be his Diane, since she died before the Omega device was invented. This show has proven time and time again that Rick loves his family, regardless of what dimension they're from. Getting any version of her back would be huge for him. However, we can't ignore that he had enough willpower to resist the Fear Hole after Morty told him that he saw Diane down there. He could be putting his best foot forward to leave the past behind him and go all in on protecting the family that he has left. Either way, I definitely think he has something in the works that'll blow us all away when it's finally unveiled. Moving on, we learn that when Rick reset portal travel in the Season 6 premiere, pulling everyone back to their dimension of origin, all the surviving clones created at the Citadel were sent to its remains, residing on an asteroid that's been turned into the Wild West, divided into a Morty town and a Rick town. Back in Rick Mirai Jack, Evil Morty revealed that Mortys are mass-produced. Beth and Jerry's across the multiverse are manipulated into falling in love, reproducing and creating Mortys, alongside the Citadel resorting to cloning. Mortys are constantly in high demand as their low intelligence masks the high intellect of a Rick, helping them lay low from interdimensional forces. Plus, they make for great pawns, and there are Ricks who never had a Morty thanks to Rick Prime killing his family. However, I believe this is the first time we learned that Ricks were also cloned at the Citadel, and that the cloned Ricks and Mortys are two sides of the same coin. Pawns for the pure-blooded Ricks. Whether that be some extra bodies to lend a helping hand, or mascots whose whole existence was meant to sell product. Like Boss Hog Rick, one of our antagonists for this episode, who was created to be the face of a gumbo chain. Despite being a walking advertisement, I'd wager that being a mascot is exactly why he was able to come into power and run the Rick side of town. All the clones should be familiar with him, as he would have been in advertisements all over the Citadel, essentially giving him celebrity status, which we know can translate into political power. The Ricks are living through uncertain times and need familiarity to fall back on, which Boss Hog Rick provides. They place their trust in him, especially when he's promising them a utopia. Despite all the Ricks and Mortys being clones, Boss Hog Rick believes that they aren't inherently equal, and that there should be a pecking order, that Mortys are meant to obey Ricks. Yet it's very apparent that he's manipulating these Ricks into building an empire where he calls the shots and rules over both the Ricks and Mortys. Not only do we see exclusively Ricks handling the construction, still being reduced to pawns for other Ricks, alongside Ricks still getting bullied by their supposed equals like the Horse Hand Rick, you also have to remember that these Ricks and Mortys are stranded here. They don't have access to portal travel, save for a select few. Homesteader Rick, it's implied, but he has to have one. Trafficker Rick, and of course, Boss Hog Rick, who hoards a giant jar of portal fluid, allocating it to Ricks who comply with his orders like Trafficker Rick. Boss Hog Rick is just taking advantage of the unfortunate circumstances that are out of everyone's control. He's not just the ringleader, he's the worst kind of Rick, one who's invested in his own self-interest, although a lot of the other Ricks in this episode aren't too far off. Like Trafficker Rick, the other big antagonist in this episode, who, as the name implies, traffics Mortys and abducts them from their side of town, selling them to Boss Hog Rick and getting doses of portal fluid in the process. I really like the design of his portal gun. It's just a broken beer bottle tied to a normal gun, which does a great job of leaning into the Western aesthetic while playing into Rick's resourcefulness and showcasing how all of these Ricks are at rock bottom. I find it very interesting that despite working closely with Boss Hog Rick and supplying him with Mortys, Trafficker Rick has no desire to live in the new Citadel. He looks down on the whole thing and doesn't try to hide it. He's just using Boss Hog Rick as a means to an end. We never get to see what he was really cooking up, but he was in it for the portal fluid more than the money.
My plans were always bigger than one jump.
The only Rick on this planet who isn't totally self-obsessed is Homesteader Rick, a loner who lives on the Morty side of town, albeit on the outskirts as a humble farmer. This is actually the Rick I have the most questions about after this episode, as he turns out to have been very involved with the affairs of the Citadel, yet his motivations remain largely unknown, though I think we can piece it together. But let's put a pin in that and talk about where the Mortys are staying. Whereas the Ricks cultivated a city-like environment where they're provided with food and shelter, the Mortys live in a rundown country-like area which only consists of a handful of buildings. The center of their little hub being an arcade, which I personally find hilarious. No matter how bad things get, Mortys are gonna find a way to game, damn it. Though they also run a shop out of this place that Homesteader Rick is a frequent patron of. That said, their living conditions are pretty rough. Whereas the Ricks are eating fine cuisine, the Mortys have to survive on junk food like cup noodles and potato chips. Most of them are dirty with stained clothes and unkempt hair, which makes Arcade Morty really stand out with his spotless attire and soured hair. Where is Homie getting his conditioner from? Despite the state of everything, the Mortys prefer this way of life as they truly feel free. They were born into a world that strips them of their autonomy, bred to be enslaved to Ricks. So even if they're living in bumfuck nowhere, they're doing so of their own accord, and for now, that's good enough. Though it poses the question of if our Rick and Morty should have intervened and tried to help them out, especially since Rick has been keeping tabs on them for a while. It probably wouldn't have taken him that long to set up a functioning society for them, and Morty was the one who empowered his brethren way back in close encounters of the Rick kind. I don't necessarily think they had an obligation to help out the Mortys, but something about them shrugging their shoulders and going, damn, that's crazy, felt like a missed opportunity to throw them back into a familiar situation and explore the ways in which they've grown. I don't know, let me know what you guys think about that in the comments. Our first hint that Homesteader Rick isn't a clone and has more going on than meets the eye comes when Trafficker Rick and his cronies raid the Morty village and fatally wound the homie, only for him to get saved by drones and return to his base, where we discover that he hoards a ton of weapons and that his truck is actually a ship. Resources are limited on this colony as they have to rely on undamaged tech from the remains of the Citadel, so it makes sense that Homesteader Rick brought them from his original dimension before returning to the Citadel and settling near the Morty part of town. We finally get a vital part of Homesteader Rick's deal when he and the surviving Mortys head towards the capital to exact revenge and rescue the trafficked Mortys. Homesteader Rick was the head of Morty replication, making him the best Morty cloning scientist around and a valuable asset to Boss Hog Rick's growing empire. Immediately, there's one question that's on my mind. What happened to this guy's Morty? Think Think about it. He's really good at making Morties, chose to stay in the rundown Morty village instead of his home dimension, and opposes the other Ricks. All of that communicates a super tragic origin story involving his Morty, or at least his family. Maybe his Morty died in a gruesome manner that drove Homesteader Rick to master the art of cloning them in the hopes of making a Morty that was just like his grandson. Or maybe he never had a Morty. His Beth could have died young like C-137 Beth, preventing Homesteader Rick from experiencing the joys that come with being a grandfather. So he turned to science to give him what he's been missing, only to strike gold and discover a very lucrative hobby in cloning Mortys. I am leaning towards something happening to his original Morty, as he does have a soft spot for them. He claims he doesn't love Mortys, he's just real good at making them, but we know that's not true. He could have ejected the Mortys who snuck onto his truck and focused completely on his quest for revenge. Instead, he aided them in their rescue mission and even comes through with a major sacrifice at the end. I'd argue that even if he tries to deny it, Homesteader Rick does view these clones as his family. They're all practically his kids, even the Ricks, at least some of them apparently. That's why he came back after the portal sent him to his original dimension. He carries a sense of responsibility towards these Mortys because he brought them into this world. His contributions caused him to suffer for ages, and they're still stuck in a shitty situation because of him. So the least he can do is keep an eye on them. But he does atone for his actions by the end of the episode as he helps the Mortys escape from the Citadel. Trafficker Rick calls Homesteader Rick a Morty whip son of a bitch, which illustrates how these Ricks believe that Mortys should only be viewed as tools, not as families. And we all know that a Rick who values his Morty is a force to be reckoned with, as he doesn't think rationally and will stop at nothing to protect those he cares about, leaving a lot of death and destruction in his path. Like Valkyric, this is an action-heavy episode that prioritizes spectacle. Arcade Morty loses one of his friends, working for a medical degree Morty. Homesteader Rick creates a Hulk Morty to serve as a diversion while the other Mortys flee. It's all good stuff, but I do think it's so saturated with action that we lost some screen time that could have went towards developing these characters a bit more. I definitely didn't have the emotional investment in these Ricks and Mortys that I had with those in the Ricklantis mix-up. Boss Hog Rick carries an immense hatred for non-clones that stems from a place of pure envy. He greatly resents the fact that they have a family, evident by his reaction to discovering that Homesteader Rick was involved in his creation. He lunged at the chance to have a father figure, although Homesteader claims he more or less gave notes, as it was a largely collaborative process, though he does refer to Boss Hog Rick as his son at the very last second. It goes to show that although many Ricks view family as a weakness, at their core, they long for what Rick C-137 has with his Smith family. I think deep down, they know it's not a weakness, it's a strength, but to cherish a family is to put someone other than themselves first, which most Ricks just aren't willing to do. And Ricks who do put everything on the line for their family often don't make it out alive, something we've seen with our Rick, as some of his closest calls have been to protect Morty. This theme of sacrifice is on full display here, as Homesteader Rick attempts to redeem himself by going down with the Citadel, destroying it once and for all. I think this is a really fitting ending for the Citadel. It was something created from Ricks acting in their own self-interest. It even capitalized on our Rick's trauma, as his quest for revenge got the ball rolling. It's simply a flawed concept that relies on a power imbalance between Rick and Morty. Even when a Morty was in charge, things were far from equal, especially because this Morty was only looking out for himself, leaving Ricks and Mortys to die gruesome deaths while he escaped the central finite curve. A cycle agreed being broken by a sacrifice from someone who's often perceived as the most selfish man in the universe is just peak cinema. It really is the best ending we could have gotten for this storyline. The cloned Mortys decide to stop clinging onto each other and do their own thing, venturing off into different dimensions with nothing but the clothes on their back. It's crazy to see, given how when this arc started way back in season 1, our Morty was the one who united them all together, forming an ideology that survived until this very episode. But it's only when they let go of this dream that Morty solved them that they're truly able to be free. It was never about waiting for the one true Morty to show up. It was about all of these Mortys reclaiming their individual identities in order to truly make a change. First, the Galactic Federation makes amends with the Defiance. Now the Citadel is completely gone with the clone Mortys achieving freedom. It really is a brand new era for the show. So many loose ends are getting wrapped up, which makes me wonder if we're we're going to see any new plot threads crop up in their place, or if the show's truly pivoting to completely episodic stories with the occasional Evil Morty episode. Despite giving his brethren new places to call home, Arcade Morty decides to return to the Morty side of the colony alone. Like Homesteader Rick, he feels as if he doesn't belong anywhere but the Citadel. It's all he's ever known. Our Rick and Morty return to the scene in search of Morty's fidget spinner. God, I'm sorry, but a fidget spinner? That's so dumb! I know it's supposed to be dumb, but guys, it's dumb. The sight of these two remind Arcade Morty of what he sought after from Homesteader Rick, but never got to have. A familial relationship, something the world denied him as he was a clone. He had no true Rick. Homesteader Rick was the closest thing, especially since he created Arcade Morty. It's tragic and ironic because our Rick and Morty are also from two separate dimensions. Rick Prime was Morty's real grandpa, and he's 6 feet under with Morty holding no emotional attachment towards him whatsoever. C-137 and Morty Prime are living proof that you can make a dynamic like this work, that you can find a family in someone even if they technically aren't related by blood. I mean, the whole Smith family that we're familiar with is composed of members from different dimensions and at least one clone. Yet, they're never treated like strangers. They're just as close as the Smith family we started with back in Season 1. We even get a nod towards Rick's development and how spending time with his interdimensional family has had a positive effect on him. Rick's willing to admit when he was wrong without a huge back and forth, evident with Morty's fidget spinner.
When you're right, Morty. Told you I admit that kind of stuff now.
And I can admit you're right about that, Rick.
You could argue that Prime stuff has influenced Rick's growth, but I actually think this moment is largely a result of Rick and Morty's falling out at the end of Season 5 before coming back together and standing their ground against Evil Morty. Morty demanded more respect from his grandfather, and despite getting trapped in a matrix or two, he's still receiving it on a regular basis instead of having the two regress into old habits. It's not the most linear growth, but it's growth nonetheless. It's interesting that we haven't had a proper Rick and Morty adventure yet this season, or an episode with a true B story, unless you count Morty and Summer splitting off from each other in the premiere. There also hasn't been an ensemble episode yet with the whole family, and Jerry is now 0 to 3 for appearances in this season. I miss the lad, but that all changes next week with the last temptation of Jerry, as Rick and Morty will embark on an intergalactic Easter egg hunt while Jerry and Beth are getting into their own shenanigans. And we know Summer will at the very least be around, so I'm excited for it. And there you have it, guys. Despite this being the second episode in a row that was heavy on the action and light on the jokes, I still really enjoyed everything it had to offer, and I'll miss the Citadel. I got a feeling we'll see these Mortys again down the road though. But for now, drop your thoughts on this episode in the comments down below, and keep the conversation going over on Twitter and Instagram at AllSharkVox and at Roundtable Vids. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe to the Roundtable for more great cartoon content. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have an awesome day. Peace!